Hello, and welcome back to the History of Comic Books podcast. This is your humble host and narrator, JT Wheatley. In our last episode, we got into the origin of Superman and how he came to be, and now we're going to get into the history of Superman and how he evolved into the hero we know today. While the first appearance of Superman would be instantly recognizable to readers today, there are still a lot of differences that separate him from the modern version. He originally worked at the Daily Star and not at the Toronto Star from Joe Shuster's hometown, but would later be renamed the Daily Planet in Action Comics number 23 in April 1940. Most significantly, Superman was very much anti-establishment, fighting lynch mobs and evil businessmen. He also didn't have much regard for human life, like he did in Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, more recently, and will be seen throwing people about at one point, destroying a plane and carrying escaping criminals, which would have likely killed them. He was a character that, like all fictional ones, had a lot of growing up to do after his birth. By September of 1938, Superman's creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster traveled to New York City to meet with national editor Vin Sullivan, Jake Leibowitz, and Harry Donenfeld to discuss the future of the character. They had also arranged with Charles Gaines through his Killer Syndicate to make a Superman strip by 1939, eventually appearing in 300 newspapers across the country. Not bad considering he was originally rejected by every paper that sent him one. While Leibowitz and Donenfeld were dreaming up ways to capitalize on their character, with Action Comics number 1 having gone through 3 printings and 900,000 copies sold, Siegel and Shuster would produce a story that satirized his merchandising when he finds out that someone has been using a fake Superman to push his products. It ends with a hilarious bit when the fake breaks his hand on the real Superman trying to punch him, and showing Siegel and Shuster had predicted the future of their character before it even happened. By 1940, Superman got one of his first nicknames with Man of Tomorrow, which came from the World of Tomorrow slogan from the New York World's Fair Comics. He also got his first venture in other medium in February of 1940 with the Adventures of Superman radio show on New York's WOR. Sponsored by Kellogg's Prep, it starred Bud Collyer as Superman. It would run to 1951 for a total of 2,088 episodes. It was here that his classic slogan, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, impervious to bullets, up in the sky, look, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. The show was an instant success, and would later spawn significant characters in the Superman canon, the young photographer Jimmy Olsen and Clark Kent's boss at the Daily Planet, editor Perry White. It also introduced kryptonite in the spring of 1943 to give him a weakness. Jerry Siegel tried to introduce such a concept with the K-Metal storyline that was unused, that also had Superman reveal his identity to Lois Lane so that it's become partners. It was never used, but it is interesting to note that Jerry proposed this story right after he married his wife, Belle, in June of 1939. Siegel and Shuster did introduce his classic villain Lex Luthor in Action Comics number 23 on February of 1940. The radio show also expanded his power set, adding X-ray vision, super hearing, and flight, which would soon be copied in the rest of the mediums. It also was a surprisingly progressive show, with Superman battling a version of the KKK and the classic story Clan of the Fiery Cross in 1946, which received praise from Newsweek magazine. This was approved by director Robert Maxwell and focused the prejudice on Asians, though the theme was universal. Other changes the radio show had over the comic book was that the Krypton was now in the Earth's solar system, and Superman was more active in World War II, with his classic tagline, Truth, Justice, and the American Way, being added in 1942. Also, on March of 1945, he teamed up with Batman and Robin. In January of 1941, Paramount contracted Max Fleischer Studios to make a Superman cartoon, which was reportedly spent up to $50,000 per episode, a fortune at the time, and used the voice actors from the radio show. The show was an instant success and even nominated for an Oscar in 1942 with its breathtaking animation, which still holds up nicely today, along with introducing for the first time Clark Kent using a phone booth to change into Superman. Superman flew in the comic cartoon as well, reportedly requested by Fleischer, who said it would be easier to animate flying over him having to leap multiple times. However, there was another reason the Man of Steel started to fly. On February of 1940, Captain Marvel debuted in Wiz Comics number 2 by C.C. Beck and Bill Parker from Fawcett Publishing, featuring the adventures of a young Billy Batson who, when he uttered the word Shazam, which would later become his modern name, he would magically turn into Captain Marvel. While the character bears some resemblance to Superman with his facial features and cape look, he had a different color scheme, red, white, and yellow, and powers which were based on magic and not science, and it included the ability to fly. It didn't help that Captain Marvel was soon outselling Superman as well. As a result, National decided to sue Fawcett over copyright infringement, though it soon became apparent that it was Superman doing the copying. Nevertheless, it eventually ended with National winning, and Fawcett was forced to settle with a fine of hundreds of thousands of dollars and the promise to cancel the Marvel Comics. In 1940, Ben Sullivan was placed with the editor Whitney Ellsworth, who joined with Leibowitz with coming up with an in-house code for National. Significantly, that none of their characters would kill, though Superman and Batman had already racked up a significant body count by that time. Read those originals. The world's finest were literally not pulling their punches. They also made a point in keeping Superman out of the war, making him instead a USO representative in 1942 during World War II. This was logical, since how long would Hitler have lasted if Superman was really sent after him? Thus he became more human and appealing to kids, as Superman would soon be fighting bullies. However, he also got more absurd, with villains like Mr. Mxyzptlk was introduced, who frequently self-referenced the fact that they were in a comic book. He did get his Man of Steel nickname, which from Steel Sterling, a minor hero of Pep Comics. Then, in late 1994, the young Superman Superboy was introduced. Originally conceived as a sidekick to capitalize on the popularity of Batman and Robin, he was later reconceived as a young Superman who was discovering his powers in Smallville, Kansas. He even got a pet dog, Krypto. Once again, this is something else inspired by Captain Marvel comics, which makes one wonder how Fawcett lost his lawsuit. By 1942, Superman was so rooted in American pop culture that the New York Yankees' Joe DiMaggio was called Superman as a nickname, being one of the first examples of the character's name becoming an adjective to describe anyone, celebrity or otherwise, as having what they call superhuman prowess. By 1948, Superman got his own serial. Short films showed in movie theaters, with Kurt Allen cast as the Man of Steel, becoming the first live-action appearance of the character. To avoid the censors, his X-ray vision couldn't see through people's clothing for some reason, but it also added that he had the more common weakness of lead, which would become a consistent feature in the comic books. Due to cost constraints, any sequence of him flying was animated. Nevertheless, the serial was a huge success, and it spawned a sequel in 1950, Atom-Man vs. Superman. Also in that same year, Bill Finger, the co-creator of Batman, wrote a Superman comic that explained his home planet of Krypton and emphasized the fact he was an orphan, something that his own creator, Jerry Siegel, would expand on in the late 1950s when he returned to the series. This was also explored in the novel The Adventures of Superman by George Lofer. In 1951, The Adventures of Superman, the TV show, premiered, starring George Reeves, and would air for 6 seasons. It began with Superman the Mole Man, which once again found him protecting the underdog, this time the Mole Men in the title, who were the target of a roving mob. The first 2 seasons were filmed in black and white and more film noir, with murders, kidnappings, suicides, and worst of all, they even killed a dog. A crippled old lady was even killed in the episode Evil 3. Superman's no-killing philosophy didn't quite translate to the TV show yet as well, as when 2 criminals discovered he was Clark Kent, he flew to the top of a snow-colored mountain, and then left them there, where they would soon fall to their deaths. All this was edited for content by September of 1952, with Robert Maxwell being replaced by Whitney Ellsworth, and the later plots were made to be more feel-good, with the villains more comical, and Superman thus being made Squeaky King for the now in-place Comic Book Code Authority, otherwise known as the CCA. The series also, ironically, saw a loss in production value when it started filming in color in the last 4 seasons, as all the sets and costumes had to be colorized as well, resulting in loss of money for action and other effects. So much so, Superman would guest star in I Love Lucy on January 14th of 1957, and by the 6th episode, a more serious tone was taken again, along with George Reeves directing some episodes. Sadly, after the show ended, George Reeves would commit suicide on November 17th, 1959. Despite being a heroic symbol, Superman was still the target of Frederick Wertham, the writer of The Seduction of Innocence, claiming he had what's called a Superman complex, believing what might makes right, but National's tireless work on his image, much due to Whitney Ellsworth, kept him above the fray for the most part. Ultimately, it would be the crime and horror comics that would suffer from the CCA, the result of the scrutiny, with the hero books like Superman being the ultimate survivors and winners. In 1959, Jerry Siegel returned to writing Superman, helping to revive the character during the Silver Age. It included a classic story in which Superman traveled back in time to his home planet of Krypton, only to witness it being destroyed again. It emphasized the fact that Superman was an orphan, giving a much-needed layer of depth, while also seeing the sales increase due to improved storytelling. Much of this was due to editor Mort Weisinger, who during the Silver Age worked to give Superman a more coherent past and world, essentially a mythology that would make him credible. Employees hated him due to his micromanaging and outright lying. His friend, fellow editor Julie Swartz, joked that his tombstone should read, "Here lies Mort Weisinger, again." However, Mort Weisinger believed Superman was the star, not the writer or the artist, and the sales did increase, keeping Superman as one of the top-selling books in the 1960s. He also made Superman more realistic, giving him a social security number, 092096616 for anyone who wants to steal his identity, and a UN passport. Mort did try to keep him out of current politics, but at one point was enlisted by the Kennedy administration as a fitness ambassador, who was even featured as a character in comic books. Sadly, this all came to around the same time that Jack Kennedy was assassinated, thus quickly ending this. As a definite plus, though, Weisinger also openly debated Frederick Warren over the merits of comic books. He even hired a then unknown 13-year-old Jim Shooter as a writer. During his reign, the villain Brainiac was introduced, along with Krypto, Superman's dog, and his cousin Supergirl, along with multiple kinds of kryptonite. In 1966, one of the stranger developments of the Superman franchise was It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, the musical. Written by David Newman and Robert Benton, and with music by Charles Stross, it premiered on March 19th. While receiving generally positive reviews, it never caught on with the public, as to paraphrase one critic, it was too campy for adults and not campy enough for the kids. Thus, it closed on July 17th after only 129 performances. It was revived as an ABC TV special on February 1st, 1975, with David Wilson as Superman and Leslie Ann Warren as Lois Lane, but viewers said it lacked the energy of even the stage show. However, it was the big screen where Superman would make his movie return. In 1978, Superman the movie was released, setting a new standard in comic book movies, though it was a long road to get there. It started in 1974, when the Saw Kings, Alexander and his son Ilya, were looking to develop a new movie property, deciding they should try Superman. Having already produced Orson Welles' The Trial and the blockbuster The Three Musketeers, they were no strangers to the movie game. But when Ilya suggested Superman to his father, he first had to explain who he was. Nevertheless, it wasn't long before they got some European backers and were approaching Warner Brothers, who awarded the movie rights for 25 years for $850,000 up front and a back-end deal that could include millions. They then spent millions advertising the film, including signing Marlon Brando for millions to play Jor-El, $2.7 million guaranteed on 11.3% of the domestic gross and 5.6% of the foreign. They then hired Alfred Bester to write the screenplay, but then moved on to Mario Puzo of Godfather fame, whose story became the basis for the film but was deemed too campy. Nevertheless, he still got $300,000 up front and 5% of the gross. Finally, they hired Robert Benton and David Newman, the writers of the failed Broadway musical It's a Bird, to fix it. Meanwhile, they looked literally everywhere for a director, from Roman Polanski to Steven Spielberg. For a while, Guy Hamilton, the director of Goldfinger, was signed on, but he couldn't film in London due to taxes. He wanted to film in Italy, but Marlon Brando couldn't because he had an outstanding warrant for sexual obscenity. Since Brando was already locked in for millions to play Jor-El, Superman's father, for just 2 weeks of work, they decided to part ways with Hamilton and finally settled on Richard Donner, the director of the hit horror film The Omen, who brought on Tom Mankiewicz to help rewrite the screenplay. The millions up front and the 7.5% of the gross didn't hurt either. A few days later, Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman was signed to play Lex Luthor for $2 million, reassuring the investors that such high-caliber talent was part of the film. Finally, there was Superman himself, and the Salkins literally considered and tested everyone, from Sylvester Stallone to Clint Eastwood to Ilias Dittis. Seriously, look at the special features of the Blu-ray. They have his test screening. Finally, they found Christopher Reeve, who they originally dismissed for being too thin and even considered it a muscle suit for him. However, Reeve, being a natural athlete, promised he could bulk up by the time of the movie. Of course, he proved to be an inspired choice, and it was his skills as a hang-glider pilot that made Superman's flying look so good. The rest of the cast quickly filled up, with Margot Kidder as Lois Lane. However, before the film could be completed, they managed to squeeze another $15 million out of Warner Brothers. Finally, Superman the movie premiered on December 15, 1978, with its creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster invited. DC had begun